Okay, I call to order this meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. And first of all, to start things off, I would like to offer congratulations to Chief Young on his re-election and the councillors that will be serving for the next term. And in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I acknowledge that we are gathered in the heart of Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta. This land is home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, also the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and our most adjacent Indigenous neighbours, the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki First Nations. Further, we are located in the Métis Nation of Alberta, District 4. The town of Canmore has been and remains committed to working to live in right relations to advance truth and reconciliation, as we acknowledge the many Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. I'm grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. As we are all treaty people, we each have ongoing responsibilities to protect and honor all life. Now, turning to the agenda for today, there's a couple of changes. And just looking for a nod from the municipal clerk. It's fine for me just to list them. Okay, so we're going to postpone item D1 to, which date was it that we're, to the January Committee of the Whole? Okay, so we will postpone item D1 to the January 23rd Committee of the Whole, and we will add item I1, which is enforcement policy and practice. Any other changes to the agenda? Then I'll move approval of the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And do we have an introduction of the new manager of community social development, and is there somebody that's going to say a few words? Okay. Mr. Mackay.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our new Manager of Community Social Development, Jill Jamieson. Jill's been a member of the Canmore community for some time, completed both work in the not-for-profit sector for other levels of government, and has also sat on a number of boards and committees that really contribute to enhancing the social fabric of our community. So we're thrilled to have Jill on board. She started just a couple of weeks ago, and it already feels like she's been here for a long time, in a good way. So we look forward to that continuing, and it's timely as community social development will be presenting here today.
Excellent. Well, Ms. Jamieson, I know I've welcomed you in person, but now welcome you formally on the record to the town of Canmore, and very happy that you've assumed this role. As you mentioned yourself, you have big shoes to fill, but I also know from having worked with you before that I believe you're up to the challenge, so welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Crouser and Council. I'm really looking forward to this. It is a great pleasure to serve. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. So then we will move to the minutes. November 21st, are there any errors or omissions? Okay, it's taken care of. All right, then I will move approval of the minutes of November 21st, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we'll now move to item D2, the 2023 Alberta Living Wage Network Report. And I believe we're waiting for Ms. West. Oh, is she on this? On Zoom. Okay. Coming to us live from another location. Ms. West, welcome to Committee of the Whole.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. Thanks for your time today. Does everything look good up on screen?
Absolutely. We can see you, we can hear you, and we can see your screen, Alberta Living Wage Network, yes.
Okay, perfect. My name is Elle West. I'm the Community Evaluator, and today I'm presenting the 2023 report from the Alberta Living Wage Network. I'll briefly cover some history of the living wage, then I'll provide some information on the methodology behind the calculation, and then I'll show how the calculator can be used to measure other ways to affect affordability in our community. If I pause occasionally to cough or sneeze, I will apologize ahead of time. I'm just trying to, there we go. Okay. In 2015, a Canmore Living Wage report was compiled by a consultant, and again in 2017. In 2019, the Alberta Living Wage Network was created by a group of representatives from different municipalities, including Canmore. And then in 2020, the Alberta Living Wage Network began producing reports for participating communities who work together as members of this network, and it continues to provide updated reports every year. Today, there are over 15 communities who are members across the province and who work together to calculate the living wage in each of their communities each year. What is the living wage? The living wage is an hourly wage that a worker needs to earn in order to cover their basic expenses and participate in their community. It is based on a worker working an average of 35 hours per week, and it is developed by a standard methodology for calculating living wages across the province. It's also recalculated on an annual basis to ensure that it accurately reflects changing living expenses and public policy affecting affordability. The calculation is a result of totaling all living expenses. This would include things like shelter, food, and clothing, then reducing these expenses by the total government benefits available. And by government benefits available, we're talking about childcare subsidies, climate action incentives, and the recent Alberta affordability payments that were made this year. And then adding the total taxes and payroll deductions required to result in the living wage. Here's a snapshot of page 11 in the report that is attached to this briefing note. And we can see each of the items that contribute to the living expenses and some of the government benefits. Food is, of course, included in living expenses, along with clothing and footwear, shelter, transportation, childcare, healthcare, and tuition. Some folks are surprised by tuition. This is included based on the national methodology from the Canadian Living Wage Framework. It assumes that one parent or one adult from each household is taking evening courses to improve employment capacity. Then other household costs. This is based on Statistic Canada's market basket measure, and it includes things like a basic cellular phone plan, household supplies like furniture and appliances, personal care products, and entertainment and recreation, which allows for community participation and social inclusion. Then finally, contingency fund. This is 2 weeks of pay set aside so that expenses can be covered if an unexpected situation arrives. We can also see in this snapshot that there are 3 different columns of expenses for 3 different household types: a family of 4, a lone parent, and a single individual. These 3 household types reflect different situations where people may have access to different government benefits and taxes and would be affected differently by policy changes. Prior to 2022, there was only one household type, a family of 4. This was expanded to 3 types to follow what world leaders in the living wage movement are doing, like the Living Wage Foundation in the UK, as well as to be consistent with the Ontario Living Wage Network. With the first scenario of a family of 4, this represents 2 parents, both working 35 hours a week, and 2 young children. It assumes that one of the children is young enough to need full-time childcare, and the other is school-aged, needing before and after school care. The household type with a lone parent and 1 child assumes that 1 child is young enough to be attending school and needs before and after school care. And last is a single individual living alone. After the total living expenses, government benefits, and taxes are tallied for each household type, the results are combined into an average. It's a weighted average based on how many of each household type there are in Alberta. A single weighted average is used rather than multiple wages for each household type because wages should not be based on family composition or lifestyle. The numbers are combined into just 1 rate per community. The final calculation for Canmore this year is $38.80 per hour. This is an increase from last year's calculation of $32.75 per hour. Let's have a look at the year-over-year comparisons. Last year's calculation for living expenses, all totaled, was less expensive than this year. We can see that the increase is about 10% for a family of 4, 5% for a lone parent, and 18% for a single individual. Of all the expenses contributing to this increase, the most significant factor is the cost of shelter. Here are the shelter costs for all three household types last year to this year. The average increase this year from last year is 26%. The living wage calculation assumes that a family of 4 would be renting a 3-bedroom unit, that a lone parent would be renting a 2-bedroom unit, and that a single individual would rent a 1-bedroom unit. Average rental listing prices in Canmore are compiled by the Canmore Community Housing, and the cost of renter's insurance is added, as well as the cost of electricity. Then let's have a look at government benefits. These created downward pressure on the living wage numbers. And these benefits impacted families more than the single individual, which is why we see a more significant increase in the single individual calculation this year compared to the other two households. Some of these government benefits are temporary, including the Alberta affordability payments and the fuel tax relief program, as they may not reoccur in future years. Canmore's high cost of living compounds the issue of a living wage. For example, the calculation for Canmore's living wage is higher than the eligibility cutoff for some government benefits, including Alberta Child and Family Benefit. If someone were to be earning a living wage in Canmore, they would pay more taxes and receive less benefits than someone earning a living wage in any other community in Alberta. This graph shows an employee's net annual earnings at different hourly rates of pay, starting with $15 an hour at the bottom and moving up to $35 an hour and then $38.80 at the top. Here we see the deductions that would be paid based on their hourly wage, including taxes and contributions to CPP and EI. While employees who are paid a higher wage are earning more, they are keeping a smaller percentage of their pay for themselves. Employers in Canmore would also face challenges as they need to pay mandatory employee-related costs, including CPP and EI contributions on behalf of their staff. The amount of these costs would be significantly higher than any employers in any other community who would need to pay a living wage for their staff. Higher wages result in costs for both employees and employers. Lowering expenses, on the other hand, can be a more cost-effective and efficient way to impact the living wage. For example, let's take a look at what would happen if we used non-market housing rental costs instead of standard market rental rates. Here we can see if each household scenario, a family of 4, a parent and 1 child, and a single individual, were renting at the Hector building through Canmore Community Housing in Palliser. Instead of current market rental rates, the reduced shelter costs would be more than 50% for a family of 4. The final living wage calculation that would come from this would be $23.44 an hour, rather than our current $38.80. The total reduction in this would be $15.30 per hour. Another example we can look at is having staff meals provided by an employer. If a complimentary staff meal was provided to employees once a day, 5 days a week, the annual cost of food would decrease by more than $2,000 for a family of 4 if both adults were receiving staff meals, and by over $1,000 for a lone parent and a single individual. The resulting calculation would be $37.33 an hour, which is a reduction of over $1.47 an hour. And another example to look at would be how much health benefits would save. If an employer provided health care benefits, this would include life insurance and critical illness insurance to employees, then this would eliminate the need for employees to purchase separate insurance, such as something through Blue Cross. The annual cost of health care would be decreased to $0 for each household type, and the resulting calculation for the living wage would be $37.40 an hour, which is a difference of over $1.40 an hour. There are many other ways that employers and the municipality, as well as community members, can each have an impact on affordability. Here's some examples. Canmore has an affordable services program, which is recently expanded to offer 2 different tiers. There's also free local transportation available in Canmore through Rome Transit. Some employers provide professional development opportunities for staff. Canmore also has recently announced the Housing Accelerator Action Plan. Some employers subsidize staff accommodations. There's also local recreation opportunities at a discounted rate, such as the Toonie Tuesdays at Elevation Place. Community members also come together for events like Food and Friends at St. Michael's on Monday nights, clothing swaps such as through the library, the Food Recovery Barn, and other free community events such as New Year's Eve coming up soon. Prior to the 2023 Alberta Living Wage Report being released, it was already clear that Canmore had a high cost of living. While the Living Wage Report provides context to the affordability concerns that are the reality of so many in our community, it can also be a useful tool to measure the impact that various government, employer, and community programs have on the cost of living. Affordability is a multifaceted issue, and wage is only part of the solution. Continuing with a multi-pronged approach is necessary for Canmore to be a vibrant and affordable community. And that's my last slide. I'm available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. West, for that presentation. And yes, it's not great news, but it's actually not news. This is something that we know that we're battling, and as you mentioned, there's a number of things that we can do, but there's a number of things that employers and others in the community can do to help be part of the solution. So I'll open it up to any questions from members of the committee of the whole. Councillor Mara.
Thank you for your report. And of course, like the mayor just said, it's not a shock to us. I'm just curious, and I've been asked this question, why the wage is based on a 35-hour work week?
There was some research done in years past when the Canada Living Wage Framework was established that showed that the average adult working in Canada was working 36 point something per hour. So they decided to go close to that average with a 35-hour work week.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And also, as it's very important for, as you've noted, and we continually remind people, this is not a directive as to what people should be paid, and this is based on certain preset scenarios. But that scenario helps us as it's an indicator. So we can see things that would have an impact, such as been described by Ms. West, whether it be housing, whether it be a benefit plan, a meal, those sorts of things. And we can see the impact of those, and therefore we can direct our energies to where there can be the greatest impact. And that is why this council is directing so much energy, and administration is directing so much energy towards our housing action plan, because that is the single greatest area that, if improved, can bring down the living wage significantly. Looking one last time to see if there are any other questions. Seeing none, thank you very much for being with us today when, according to what you said earlier, you're probably not feeling well, but you sounded great and you did great, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll now move to item D3, which is Local Car Share Program Options Update. Ms. Fournier, welcome to the Committee of the Whole.
Good afternoon, Mayor Councillor and members of Council. I am here today to talk about car sharing. The intention of this presentation is to provide you with an overview of research and exploration done to date on car sharing, to give you an opportunity to ask questions or have a discussion. I'll start with the background and then move to an overview of different car sharing models and approaches that have worked through a number of case studies. I'll then discuss what's been done, looking at it in the local context, next steps, and then we'll wrap up with questions and discussion. There's time at the end for all of that, but if there is a clarification needed on any slide, please just jump in. Last year, Council directed administration to explore options with regards to a car share program and report back. So this is what is happening today. It has been on our radar for a lot longer than that, though, as car sharing is included in the 2018 Climate Action Plan, as well as the Integrated Transportation Plan. I'm going to provide some background just for the benefit of anyone listening who might not be familiar with the concept. It really represents a shift to how we approach driving and car ownership. So the option to have a car that is our own and only ours, and to use that car whenever we want, does come with a fairly significant cost, which has been estimated at about $8,000 to $10,000 per year. Cars, well, great when we need them. They do sit around for most of the time, and the research shows that it's up to 95% of the time that they're actually not being used. And collectively, they take up a lot of space. With car share, vehicles are instead a shared resource, and the costs of those are shared between many people. The big difference is that people can, instead of that sunk cost of a personal car, just pay for the vehicle when it is actually needed. The big difference between car share and car rental is the ability to book for very short time increments. So many car share organizations let you book for as little as 15 minutes. Some even let you book and pay by the minute. Car share started to become mainstream in the 1990s, and today millions of people worldwide are depending on it as part of their mobility needs. While we don't have a community car share program in Canmore, we do have experience with it. So our administrative fleet is essentially a very small scale, very simplified version of what car share is. There are 4 different main approaches, and I'm going to go through them because I will reference them throughout the case studies. So the first is station-based. So like our administrative fleet, the car has a designated spot where it must be returned to at the end of the trip. There is one way, which has beginning and an end trip, 2 options, but it's not well used and only works in very specific contexts. Peer-to-peer is relatively new, so it's essentially the Airbnb for cars. So private vehicle owners can rent out their car for others to use via an online app. And the big advantage of this is that it takes advantage of existing cars. And it doesn't require that huge outlay of capital to purchase cars and to set up a centralized organization to run a program. It does, though, come with some unintended consequences at times. So there has been instances where people are buying cars for the purpose of renting them out as an income stream. So that obviously would run counter to our transportation and climate goals, is to have additional cars. And the last is I should say that Turo, the main peer-to-peer car sharing provider in North America, currently has a minimum of a single-day rental. And so that is already available through car rental agencies, is that ability to book for a single-day rental. The rates that are local for local vehicles generally aren't very affordable either. With free floating, that's the car-to-go model. So there's a defined zone, and the cars can be dropped off or picked up anywhere within that zone. So very convenient, users love it, but it is extra work to administer. So sometimes staff actually have to go out and redistribute cars if they become too concentrated in an area. It also requires a lot of cars and a lot of parking to provide that level of convenience. And what has been found with this type of model is it's really great for short trips, but what it can do is actually supplant walking trips because of that convenience. Someone will just jump in the car instead of walking the 8 blocks. Car share is only part of an overall mobility system. So it's not the be-all, end-all that will solve all the problems. It is definitely not for people for their commute to Calgary. It is really for occasional trips. It's also not an alternative to investing in really efficient transit or investing in really effective cycling and walking infrastructure. It actually needs to work in concert with those things, and it supports those things. It's best in denser areas with really great access to amenities. In the local context, it would be best for somebody who can cycle or take the bus to work or work from home and then use the car share vehicle if they need to go to IKEA or Costco or want to go somewhere for a day hike. It also tends to be really attractive where parking is difficult, car ownership is kind of unwieldy, or parking is expensive. So that's when car share is really successful. Generally, how it happens in a community is either from the inside, so a small group of residents get together, create something, and it slowly grows over time, or an existing organization comes from the outside and expands into a local area. In some cases, municipalities have taken an active role. Often, it's been a combination of these. I'm going to go now through the case studies and talk about how different communities have made it happen. In Calgary and Edmonton, they have Communato. So this car share organization is one of the biggest and oldest in Canada. They've been around since the 90s, mostly out east. With their role in Calgary, they work with the city mostly around just parking. So getting reduced parking costs for their car share vehicles and access to parking in really attractive spots. You've likely seen Communato cars around Canmore, as many of the Calgary members are using them to come and recreate in this area. Kootenay Car Share is that example of the grassroots-based organization. So it really started with a couple residents in Nelson and grew over time. So it's now a cooperative, and they have recently expanded into some other small mountain towns. They have an interesting model in that they're station-based, but they now have introduced a peer-to-peer platform just for their members to share amongst themselves. They have 325 users and 20 vehicles across the communities. So with all these, I'm going to give you the vehicle numbers and the member numbers just to give you a sense of the scale that is being achieved in the different communities, because it really varies depending on where you are. The $500 upfront membership is fairly standard with the co-op model, as is an alternative monthly fee. So there's usually a base rate or membership fee, and then users pay for time, in this case, and for Kootenay, or kilometers, or both for what they use. Yellowknife has a car share program. It has 2 cars. It was started by a few groups that got together and created a co-op. Part of their mandate, in addition to the car share aspect, is proving that electric vehicles can work in cold climates. That's a big focus of theirs. They started with a 3-year partnership with the city of Yellowknife. So the city provided some financing. They paid for all this charging infrastructure. And in exchange, they got exclusive usage of those cars for their staff during office hours. You can see by the numbers under 50 users that it's quite a small program. And the insurance is quite expensive. The coordinators noted that that's a big, almost a barrier for them to keep that program running. BC has an advantage over other provinces in that the Insurance Corporation of BC provides car share co-ops with fleet insurance that is a little bit more affordable than this. In Invermere, instead of creating a new organization, the existing nonprofit started offering a car share program as part of their broader scope of services. They also are providing that experience with an EV, but one of their main drivers was addressing a rental gap, because there's no car rental in that area, and it was noted in the community that was a big gap, and so they wanted to fill that. Aspen, Colorado has a municipally run program, so the coordinator is paid just as regular city staff, but spends most of his time running this car share program. And his role is really split, and this seems to be fairly typical. About 50% of the work is about member services and onboarding new members, and the other 50% is managing the actual physical vehicle fleet, cleaning, snow tires, all of those things. They use grants to purchase the cars, and then the user fees are just cost recovery for the insurance, fuel, maintenance, and the ongoing costs. They, in addition to residents, really focus on small businesses. So they like small businesses to commute in and have the staff commute in via transit, and then use the car share vehicles for their business needs, their site visits, going to and from meetings. So that's a big part of their work down there. In Plaiseville, Quebec, they also have a municipally operated program, but quite different. It involves letting residents use their municipal fleet vehicles, on evenings and weekends. The program has expanded to other municipalities in the region through a significant grant from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. For them, their main driver is fleet optimization, as well as building out EV use and an EV network. Their staff did note that they really can't expand beyond this user base of about 100 users, just due to their internal capacity. In Trois-Rivières and Victoriaville, they also share municipal vehicles with the community, but in a very different way. And so what they've done, instead of having a municipal fleet, they actually partnered with Communato. So they use car share vehicles for their city staff, and then the community can use them as well. So this works for both partners, because for Communato, the city acts like an anchor tenant and provides a guaranteed level of revenue, which essentially de-risked the notion of coming into these small communities. And then on the city side, they benefit because it actually costs them less and is easier to just use the car share vehicles as opposed to owning and managing their own fleet. The last example I'll give is a subset of what Modo offers, and Modo is the big car share organization in BC. So they have their existing community-based program, but they also will go and have partnerships or work with developers of multifamily buildings to provide a car share vehicle on site for that building in exchange for reduced parking requirements. So the municipalities that they work with all have parking substitutions ratios in their bylaws. So for City of Vancouver and New Westminster, they have a substitution ratio of 5 less spots for every car share vehicle that's on that site. There's been a lot of research into the overall impact of car sharing, and the numbers do range quite a bit, as you can see here. So in terms of vehicle reduction and personal driving reduction, part of that range is just based on how effective the car share program is, what kind of local context it operates in, but these are the general scale of what has been achieved. Well, it seems counterintuitive that providing people cars actually reduces driving and moves people into other modes of transportation, such as transit, cycling, and walking. The reason that happens is because of the shift from that sunk cost of car ownership to every single vehicle trip becoming a decision point and having a separate cost. So if it's going to cost me $40 to use a car for half a day and I have to walk 10 minutes to go get it, I'm going to think more about whether or not I could just take transit for that trip, or whether or not I could combine a whole bunch of errands at one time and get them all done, or cycle, or use another mode. So that's where that shift occurs from, is that kind of incremental cost of each trip. It creates equitable access to transportation, so people who are depending on transit or other modes do still have access to those cars for those trips that aren't well served by transit or other modes. And it can obviously be more affordable if you're avoiding that $8,000 to $10,000 a year and spending less money for trips that you only need to be taking. The big car share organizations have self-reported some numbers that they've been able to see amongst their numbers in terms of, or members, in terms of numbers of cars reduced and the greenhouse gas emissions that they've avoided. So about a third to 50% there. The challenge, though, while there's great benefits, it's also really hard, especially in small towns, which is probably why it hasn't happened here yet. So firstly, it's about culture shift. So car ownership, car culture, it's super ingrained in our society. We've built infrastructure, housing all around the personal vehicle. Even today, as we know this and are trying to move away from it, we still call every other mode except driving alternative transportation, which is a personal pet peeve of mine. I wish we'd stop that. And it's really hard to make it work financially as well. So it's a big culture shift. Car share, having a car share program on its own isn't going to guarantee success. There's a lot of supportive infrastructure and culture shift work that has to be done. And with Car2Go, if you all recall, leaving Calgary a few years ago, it just demonstrates how hard it is to make it work financially and the tight margins that car share organizations work on. Most of the people who are in this line of work and doing this, they're doing it for the community benefit and the environmental benefits, and because they believe in it, not because it's a great economic money-making venture for them. As you can see from these lists, for kind of conventional car share program, there are a lot of capital costs that have to go into it and a lot of ongoing costs as well. And it's difficult to balance all those costs with still making rates attractive and affordable to the users. And car share has to be done really well for it to get uptake and results. So it has to be dependable, it has to be convenient, it has to be accessible. And everything you do to make it more convenient, dependable, and accessible actually costs the program more. And so you're having to recover those costs. So it's a difficult relationship and balance. I've put the ratio of one vehicle to 35 to 50 members up. So that's kind of the identified sweet spot or target that's recommended in the research. And that's an important number for a couple reasons. One is just to keep in mind you want the cars to be used, but you also have to make sure that they're available when people want them. So you have to balance that revenue generation of a vehicle with making sure that they're there. The other thing is just to give an idea of scale. I've given lots of examples of these very small town, small car share programs with 1 or 2 vehicles, but if you're looking at in terms of the numbers of people you could serve, you won't get the meaningful shift in vehicle reduction or GHG reduction unless it's a bigger program. And just a note on EVs. So they do add complexity. They're great, they reduce fuel, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they make it harder for a car share program to use. So, and you also have to consider that they need charging time. So that's time that the car is not out being available to people. So it just has to be a special consideration and well thought out if EVs are incorporated into a car share program. So what we've been doing locally, looking at it here, it really started with a research project by a master's student, and we were very fortunate to have her do this work as part of her degree. So she really dove down deep into the rural car sharing examples that aren't well known. And so most of those case studies up there is her credit. So I'm very grateful to her for her work. And then in 2023, we started collaboratively working with the town of Banff on this, as they are interested in it as well. So one of the first steps, though, was really establishing what it is, why we're even looking at this, and what it is we'd hope to achieve, and if we are going to look at car sharing, what it needs to do in order for it to be deemed successful. So this is why we're looking at it, because we are interested in enabling a higher proportion of zero vehicle households, or helping people move from having 2 vehicles and maybe one's not needed as much down to 1. Providing kind of some equity benefits. So providing access to a vehicle for those who don't own a vehicle, either for affordability reasons or just personal choice or situation, to help achieve our targets. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions and our climate targets, and also helping to move us towards our mode share targets. And lastly, looking at how it could reduce parking demand. One of the things that we did was send out a request for information to proactively reach out to car share organizations, because it's been our assumption to date that we're just too small, nobody wants to come here, but we thought we'd ask the question. Is anybody interested in coming here? What would be expected or needed from the municipality? And are there options out there that we've never thought of that could work well? We did get limited response. We were asking for free information from people, but the response that we did get was quite insightful. So Moto responded that they aren't set up to operate outside of BC, but they do lease out their booking software, and Yellowknife and Aspen both use their booking software. Communauto did confirm that they don't plan to expand into this area on their own, but they did indicate that they would be willing to discuss potential partnership ideas in the future. Turo, the online peer-to-peer platform that I mentioned, was super keen to grow their usership out in this area, and had noted that in their submission. They do already operate here, like there are Canmore residents who are renting out their vehicles on Turo already, and it will grow on its own, with or without us. In Banff, however, peer-to-peer is limited because of the federal and local legislation that dictates where commercial activities can occur. So peer-to-peer car rental is technically a vehicle rental service, and it cannot occur outside of their commercial zone. So they have a lot more limiting factors out in Banff when it comes to peer-to-peer. In terms of next steps, it does make sense to continue any discussion or work on car share at a regional level. It does make sense for both communities. We have similar goals. The Town of Banff staff have put in a budget submission for 2024 to undertake a more formal feasibility study into car share, and it is contingent upon final council approval, but it has made it thus far, and so hopefully they'll be able to do that, and we can leverage that and learn from what they're able to undertake on that study. In addition, the Bow Valley Regional Transit Services Commission's current strategic plan actually does include an action around car sharing. And given the complementary nature of car share with transit, it does make sense for future work to occur with, alongside, or by them. So with that, I will open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fournier. I was very interested to see the example of Trois Rivières and the municipal sort of involvement to help anchor something happening. Now, I did a quick look in Trois Rivières, and I forget what the other,
Oh, it was Victoriaville.
yeah, they're quite a bit larger. I mean, they're
40,000, was that right?
well, Trois Rivières is about 140, yeah, and then the other. So I mean, it's nine to 10 times bigger, right? And so, and I'm wondering, do you need a certain? I guess you would need those numbers in order to make something like that work. Or, I guess the other part is part of this exploration, maybe in discussion with Banff, is it about municipalities being part of the program? Like formally, they would use either contribute vehicles and have an ownership stake, or rent the vehicles from them, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely could be part of that, and I'm assuming that, that would be a key thing that they would look into because of that kind of co-benefit and providing a bulk of vehicles or users for that.
Right.
I don't know that there's a specific size. Like, nowhere did I see under 10,000 can't work. No. It just, there's different approaches that work to varying degrees.
Or
But the issue and why the hesitation for these large organizations to come in is just, it's a lot of work to administer. And so if you only have 10 vehicles in a community, you're doing almost as much work there as you would be if you have 100 vehicles.
Right.
Like, there's a certain scale and economy of scale when you get bigger, which is why it tends to be, a lot of them tend to focus on the bigger cities.
Or with a town shaped like Canmore is, maybe we need to have our transit get to a certain level of maturity so that somebody from Larch or Bow Valley Trail or whatever can get to wherever the cars are with relative ease, right? Yeah, okay. Looking to the community as a whole to see if there are any questions about this very thorough report. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mayor Krausert. Thank you, Ms. Fournier, for your presentation. With the car share program that was municipally run, were there issues or challenges with repair or maintenance or asset replacement timelines being shorter, or even people leaving the cars messy?
Yeah, the cleaning is part of it in all of the models, whether it's private or a co-op or the municipal. We're humans, you can't always be depended on. So cleaning was built into all of the schedules for that. So it wasn't any more or less than the other programs, it just had to be accounted for. And he did say, he's like, half of my job is dealing with these 7 vehicles and dragging them in for maintenance and picking up stranded people or they all talked about changing out winter tires. That seemed to be a big piece of work for everyone. So, and in terms of your question around life cycling, it does put a lot more miles on per year than is typical. They didn't flag it as something that was problematic or very accelerated. I think often there's a shorter timeline than what, say, a personal, I would let my car go a lot longer than what a lot of these programs would or municipalities would. So.
Do they use any of the revenues from the fees people pay to fund replacements?
No, well, in Aspen's case, it was just they had kind of blocked off the operational costs funded through the users. Okay. So they figured out how much they were paying for insurance, fuel, maintenance, cleaning, and then that's what the users funded. And then they sourced their vehicles through some federal grant programs always, and any replacement vehicles.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Ms. Fournier, for presentation. I was really interested in the part by kite mobility or moto, because it kind of twigs on me how with Palace or ASP starting to get built out, maybe a smaller approach where the vehicles are tied to a development or a particular building. Any other thoughts, or has CCH been made aware of this kite program or anything like that?
Not the kite specifically, and that was the only case. I was running out of time. I would
Yeah.
have covered it. But kite was the boutique service that was really specific for in-building, especially underground parking. So with kite, there's only a specific one type, like one building typology. It has to be a fairly large building. It's underground, really urban. It's like a downtown Toronto or Calgary kind of offering. And for that, the one drawback of that approach is that it's not available to anyone else. It tends to be only those users.
Yeah,
So
if you live in the building.
It shrinks your user base, and it also just means that like your neighbor can't benefit from the program. So other research has also shown that the best spot for a car is actually surface parking, like right outside the front door, as easy as possible for many people to get at it. And then they're also visible, and it helps with that culture shift. So
Right.
yeah, with kite, I'm not entirely sure just because of the underground.
Right, okay, awesome. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. And thanks for this very thorough report. It's something that I was excited to see to come to council, as you know. One of the questions I had, through the report, you've looked at alternative models through different municipalities, different parts of North America, et cetera. Was there any thought put into finding out if actual for-profit car rental companies wanted to participate in something like this, whether it be on a community basis or even larger?
Yeah.
And the reason why is, so we are a one-car family and have been for a while, and our second car is through Enterprise. And they gave us a fairly generous discount for a long time because we were regular renters, and it worked within the budget we had as a second vehicle, well within it, probably a tenth of what we would have had to spend in a year if we'd had our own. But I was just wondering if that was at all investigated and if there was any interest. I'm going to guess at this moment, based on how much they're making on vehicles, not so much. But at some point, that is going to change.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is actually Enterprise. One of the main car rental companies does have a car share program, but it's limited to certain communities or certain areas. So it's not available in Alberta, but it is being thought of and done. And in BC, EVO is actually the BC Automobile Association, so not a car rental company, but our equivalent of AMA that run that. So there is interesting kind of approaches and partnerships or delivery agents that could be done.
Right.
I didn't see any in Alberta. I've contacted a few people.
Yeah, I
and
can
they're
imagine.
Like, what? Unfortunately. So it's that
Yeah.
culture shift thing that I mentioned, but I think it is. And that was part of the intention of the RFI, was to be like, oh, hey, maybe somebody's thinking about this or doing something.
Right.
But unfortunately,
Not yet.
not that we heard of locally.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you, and thank you for your fulsome report. It sure showed me I wasn't much into that world. I have my own vehicle, and I just have never had the opportunity to do that. I'm just curious, when you're looking at the different models, my concern is it's a sort of a continuation to Councillor Forbert's question, is when for fueling and recharging, that's also, you would need a person to make sure, because I know my husband, when he gets in my vehicle, he goes, because it's always on empty. So that's on purpose. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Like, is there someone that would also have to go out and make sure, because unless you have them all come into a station, you'd have to have someone that goes around and make sure they're charged and make sure they're fueled or whatever vehicle you had. So that would be in your maintenance, but there'd have to be somebody that also did that, correct?
Yeah, for sure. That is handled in many different ways. I know for Modo, I was a member of it, and if you did that to somebody, they would charge you. Like, you would pay a penalty for that. And they make that well known, that if you are not fueling up those vehicles, that you're going to pay for that. And same with cleaning. So if you leave the car a mess, Same kind of thing. So there's some mechanisms that are built in. A lot of the cooperative-based models are really kind of trust-based. So like our administrative fleet, when you come back from your trip to Calgary, you stop and you gas up, or charge up now. So it is based on the members, and that's kind of the cooperative model, is that you're kind of in this together and you're sharing that. So there is that, usually it's a fuel card, but that's some of the ways that it's built in. So it does come up, people do that. There's things in place, so it's like with any shared fleet. In terms of staff, there are some programs, again, this is just one of the things that adds cost, so they go around and make sure. It's another thing that adds cost is the technology. So there's a lot of like geomatics systems in the more sophisticated models, it's all built into the car. And so if someone has returned it empty, like alarms are gonna go off at headquarters and people will know how much charge. So that information can be built in, but it needs to be kind of invested in at the front end. So does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. It's more like the responsibility is on the person,
it's kind of on
the user.
The users, generally, especially with the nonprofit cooperative models. And it seems to have worked. It does happen.
Okay, thank you.
You know, Councillor Mara, I don't have a lot of sympathy for your husband, because if you're, to have to gas up the vehicles, there's a lot that, you have to expect it when your name is Phil.
Merry Christmas. Here's a dad joke.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Councillor Ma.
I got landfill in my car. Is there any sort of resources that groups of people can just do their own grassroots car co-op that you could point in? Like I feel like I'm doing that almost ad hoc because our car died a little while ago, and I've just been borrowing different people's cars. And yeah, is there anything that you've seen in your adventures that maybe like, hey, I got 20 friends, let's make this our own thing?
Yeah, for sure. I think, one resource are people like Kootenai Car Share. They really want to help. They have been there. That's how they started. Number two, Move Me, MOVMI, all small case. They are this centralized hub of car sharing resource and expertise. That's where that one graphic that I showed came from. And they have great information. They have like the shared handbook of mobility excellence or something. Yep. So they're a really great resource. As you look into it, what will happen is you will get scared because there's a lot of...
like insurance or something.
Yeah, insurance, for example. Insurance is probably one of the key barriers to grassroots or informal car sharing. Because it can cost a lot. With Yellowknife, $6,000. I think that was also the kind of the costs that we would be facing if we were to do something like that for a vehicle. So there's that aspect. But I think those would be two kind of good ones. If I hear of any, I'll let you know. And I think that's also kind of how peer-to-peer was born, is trying to fill that need, because maybe you just want to share with a few groups of neighbors. Because what peer-to-peer does is their insurance takes over for that booking. So if you go and put your car from 2 to 4 and then your neighbor books it, their insurance takes over from 2 to 4 p.m.
Okay.
And that's how you're protected. But that's integrated into the cost as well. So that's why some of the costs for peer-to-peer car sharing can appear quite high, is because of that insurance cost.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Super helpful.
I imagine there's also, for a very small program, you'd have to have some redundancy, because if a vehicle gets into an accident or breaks down, if you only have 2 or 3, that's going to impact so many people, right? And it won't work unless you have enough cars to have that.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to overbuild a little bit if you want to kind of go from not like a few neighbors sharing and slowly growing, but if you want to kind of, like, we're doing this, you have to overbuild it. And that's a lot of upfront resources, which is why it's hard for nonprofit groups to do that. Because often with other things, you can kind of pilot them and try them out. But with car sharing, like, if someone has a bad experience, they're never going to go back again. So you kind of have to build it well and put the resources in up front to make sure that experience is really good to get them coming back.
So you either have to have that system that's already in place and that can adapt and include your municipality, or have individuals or groups that have that passion to work through those difficulties and
For sure.
overcome those initial barriers.
Yeah,
okay.
and not to expect immediate results right away. Like, to your point, if there's only 3 cars, it's doubtful that all of the users are going to sell their car right away and just go all in. You know, it's probably for the people who are the 2-car families, and maybe they're just going to test it out for a while and not use the car as much. But they would have to have a backup plan if you have a very small program.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for this, as I said, this thorough report and good conversation, and it looks like it's going to be part of an ongoing conversation. It's always something that's maybe a potential out there that could help, but the circumstances have to be right. Right, okay.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
You too. We'll now move to item E, Councillor updates, and I'll just open up the floor. Anybody have any questions of any member of council about anything? Yeah. I notice we get Councillor Graham either arrives and there's no report, or he puts in a good report and then he's not here. You get one or the other, right? No. But actually, I'm very glad that he's able to get some downtime in someplace warm. So any questions? Okay, seeing none. Moving then to the administrative update, we'll go by the larger sections. Any questions under Section A, Corporate Strategic Team? Under B, Municipal Services. I'll let you catch up. Oh, you're good? Okay. Okay. Under C, Corporate Services. Under D, Municipal Infrastructure. And anybody just discover something they meant to ask? So anything about anything? No, okay. Then in that case, anything on our resolution action list? Anybody had a question about? Seeing none then, we'll move to item, and of course there's the H1 there for correspondence for anybody's interest. We'll now move to item I1, and I move that we go in camera. Oh, sorry, Dr. Cottle.
I'm wondering if we could take a break, and that I need to update you on something that we may need to add a second in-camera item. So if we could take a break.
Sure.
And then come back, and then
Sure,
go in camera?
let's take a 10-minute break.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
10-minute break, and then we'll come back to deal with the in-camera items. Are we going to be asked to make any decisions coming of these in-camera items?
No.
Okay, in that case, then we're going to go on a break, and we're going to go in camera and come out of camera, and there's not going to be anything, so we're actually going to end our streaming right here. So with that, on to the break and end of the stream.